Shalom, and welcome back to Window on Mount Zion, to Chapter 7 and Part 3. It's the Six-Day War, and this is Tuesday, June the 6th, 1967. And it was a day we shall never forget. All day, without a stop, bullets and shells were flying and exploding. Always the noise seemed to be just outside the gallery. We were in touch with Albert and Raymond from time to time by phone, and they were still at the King's Hotel in a shelter, and all was going well with them. Paulita was also in a safe place. Jerusalem was being heavily shelled, but the news was encouraging. Israeli forces were occupying so many places, making such rapid progress, it was hard to believe. Yonah, myself, and the two priests from the Domitian Abbey were still taking cover in the Palumbo Gallery. But the battle continued all day, and that day we did not see anyone, and were wondering what was happening to our boys and all the soldiers here on Mount Zion, and what was happening to our house. Were the Jordanians on our border making any advances? We knew only too well how close they were. We had some provisions to eat, and with a little paraffin we could boil water and have a hot drink, but we could not move out of the gallery the whole day, and going upstairs was always a great risk. Brother Daniel, one of our companions, spent much time reading from his prayer book, and Father Samuel kept on trying to get different stations on his transistor radio. Conversation did not flow easily. We each had our secret thoughts, and the incessant noise outside kept us quiet. Father Samuel, his transistor held to his ear, suddenly grew very intent, listening. By coincidence, he had tuned to a station broadcasting in Arabic, which he understood. When it was finished, he said simply, "King Hussein is giving orders to his soldiers. Kill every Jew you encounter. Kill them with your guns, your hands, your feet, your teeth. Only kill them." At nightfall, the shooting died down a little. The commander came down looking exhausted and preoccupied. We made some coffee for him, and he told us our progress had been amazing. The Arab military post opposite us had been conquered, and also other surrounding Jordanian posts. Only one of his men had been slightly wounded, and the others were perfectly all right. He was a soldier in the regular army, a man with his 2 feet planted firmly on the ground, his hands trained to use a gun, and his personality shaped to lead his men. "I have had some strange experiences today," he said quietly. His thoughts seemed to be traveling in unaccustomed paths. Every bullet we fired struck its target. Whatever we did succeeded. We were amazed to see how quickly the Arabs evacuated their posts. He sat sprawling on a chair, his long legs stretched out, his broad shoulders drooped slightly as he relaxed for the few minutes while he drank his coffee. He was very silent, and then, as though speaking to himself, he said, "I cannot believe the things I did today. It was as though someone else was commanding." Then he returned to his men upstairs. Later, Danny and Ephraim came across the courtyard from their post on the border, braving the intermittent shooting. Their hands were blackened by gunpowder and sweaty, and their boyish faces were smeared and showing signs of strain and exhaustion. "Everything is all right," they assured us. We thanked God. "Stay here and have some coffee," we suggested. No, we must return at once. We only wanted to know how things were with you." They bent their helmeted heads low as they felt their way along the walls on their way back. That day had changed them from carefree boys to responsible men, defenders of Mount Zion. We prepared to settle for the night. Yonah insisted on going upstairs to find some mosquito nets so that we could have some relief from the sandflies. Father Samuel and I lay side by side under one net, and Brother Daniel and Yonah under another. We were as close together as was possible to be on account of limited space. I laughed inwardly as I found myself in this situation with Yonah and the two priests. It seemed so funny, and I thought how war can change the normal rules and customs of life. We were tucked in our sleeping bags, and by midnight were so exhausted that we were no longer disturbed by the infernal noise, and we all went to sleep. An hour later, we were awakened by a very loud explosion in our vicinity. "That was very close," said Yonah. Perhaps our house was shelled, I thought, wondering how much damage had been done. We managed to fall asleep again until dawn. Then we made a hot drink and heard the most fantastic news. Most of the posts around Jerusalem had been taken, and it seemed that soon we would be in the old city. We just could not believe it. Wednesday, June the 7th. As the first rays of light uncovered the darkness of that terrible night, the shooting died down and there was much movement in Garden Square. It was suddenly filled with soldiers and trucks, and by the time the sun had risen a little above the horizon, the shooting had almost stopped. We went outside for the first time. I looked at our house, and it was still standing intact. I rushed upstairs. Everything was covered with a thick layer of dust and dirt which had fallen from the ceiling with every explosion, but I could not see any damage, not even a broken window. I was astonished. Then I went into our bedroom and saw holes in the wall. 6 bullets had left as many holes in the wall above the wardrobe. They had pierced the window, making 6 holes in the curtain, but no other damage. But where could the loud explosion have been? I was thinking, when Brother Daniel came by to tell us that a shell had exploded in the house belonging to the church near to the gallery. In addition to this, the church dome had suffered damage, and a few more holes had appeared in the walls of the military post. Besides the damage all around Zion Gate itself, as you can see here, which is still pockmarked by many bullets, we could not see much other damage on the whole of Mount Zion. Where had all the bullets and shells landed during those 2 days and nights of constant battle? It really was a miracle. Mount Zion seemed to have been specially protected. I remembered the commander's words. It was as though someone else was commanding. Yonah and I talked to the 50 or so soldiers who filled the square. They were very tired, but the time had not yet come for them to rest. We made them strong Turkish coffee, and never was coffee more appreciated or of greater help. They had not had a hot drink for almost 30 hours. Hours of harrowing experiences and difficulty still lay ahead of them in the old city. There was an atmosphere of excitement among them all, as if something portentous was going to happen. Then the commander of the unit said to me, "We are now going into the old city through this border on Mount Zion to meet up with our boys who are entering the city through another gate and the other gates, but we have no flag with us, and we must have a flag." He looked at me questioningly. "Can you help us? There is no time to lose." "Come with me," I answered, and rushed upstairs. I took a sheet out of the linen cupboard and remembered that I had a new tube of blue watercolor paint. We spread the white sheet on the kitchen table and excitedly, with the watercolor running, painted on the Star of David and the 2 blue stripes of the flag. My heart beat very fast as we attached and then rolled up the flag on a stick from the garden and gave it to the commander. We watched the jeeps and half-tracks filled with soldiers descending the hill and crossing the border into the old city. We wondered what would happen to those boys and our hurriedly improvised flag. Many thoughts passed through my mind. The flag of the State of Israel was going from this house into the old city. Would it be the flag of victory hoisted on the walls of Jerusalem when the city was liberated? Then the shooting started again. There was hard fighting in the streets, and blood flowed in the narrow alleyways of the old city. A high price was being paid in human lives and suffering in order to break down the walls of hatred and division. There are moments on the road of destiny which inspire fanciful thoughts, perhaps even prophetic thoughts. I looked into the future, the promised future, when the state of Israel, according to the Word of God, the Bible, would become the kingdom of Israel, the kingdom of peace, the kingdom of God on earth, with the Messiah ruling on the throne of David and bringing peace to all the world. The flag of the state of Israel had been made on Mount Zion at this hour of destiny. Could it be that the flag of the kingdom of Israel would also be made here? It would be hoisted high on Mount Zion for all the world to see, a time of great rejoicing when, as the verse tells us, the Lord of hosts shall reign in Mount Zion and in Jerusalem gloriously. Later in the morning, there was a silence, a strange silence after the noise, broken only by occasional shots from snipers and the frenzied voice of a demented man crying loudly in the old city. The silence became so impelling, it seemed to enter into the soul. I felt I was holding my breath on the brink of eternity. Then the sound of a trumpet could be heard, the long blast of the ram's horn, the shofar, shattering the silence. The battle for Jerusalem was over. Rabbi Goren, the army chaplain, was blowing the shofar at the Wailing Wall, the western wall of the temple, and we could hear him then singing the prayers. And he carried the Torah scroll up to the wall from where it had been banned for so many years. At that moment, all Israel was pouring out its heart in prayers of thanksgiving. For the first time for nearly 2,000 years, independent Jews were again in the city of David, at the temple wall, freed of its enemies. I remembered the time when Jews had stood praying at that wall and had been stabbed in the back as they prayed. Everybody wept for joy that morning. Even soldiers, who were never in any way religious, were stirred to the depths of their being and acknowledged the miracle from God. Who could have believed that only 2 days after fighting began, we would be in the old city again? God had shown his power in Israel for all the world to see. During the next few hours, hundreds of soldiers were sent up to Mount Zion. For 2 days it became a military camp. Units were sent from here to different places and were continually being replaced. It was a military camp in action. Cooks were preparing the food, and men were lying and resting on every available space on the ground. In the afternoon, Yonah was allowed to go to Polita, and it was possible for Albert and Raymond to return to Mount Zion. I ran to meet the car, bringing them up the hill, our own car completely undamaged. How happy and thankful we were to be together again, unharmed. Tamar also seemed glad to be back. It was strange that we'd been separated for those 2 hard days and nights, but that too had been the hand of Providence. However hard it had been in the city, it was harder here, and Tamar would never have survived, as any sound resembling a shot had always sent her into a frenzy of fear. Albert and Raymond told of their experiences and narrow escapes during the shelling of the city, but most of the time they had been safe in the shelters. Albert was quiet with emotion. Imagine the flag of Israel on the walls of the old city of Jerusalem after nearly 2,000 years. I noticed that the flag flying on David's tower did not appear to be the usual printed flag. It looked more like a homemade one, Raymond remarked. My heart beat a little faster as he spoke, And then I told them the story of the flag made so hurriedly on the kitchen table at Ha'ohel, the flag destined to mark another milestone in Jewish history. How many other flags had been hoisted there since it was first a city of the Jews? How much suffering and persecution the Jews had endured under those flags since the time of King David's reign. When we came back to the house and saw the mess that had to be cleared up, we thought at first that we would have to sleep in the gallery. Yet, with a special effort, we were able to eat together in our own kitchen once more and sleep in our own beds. It was almost impossible to grasp the fact that only 2 days had passed and the battle for Jerusalem was over. However, the war itself had not yet ended, and we listened intently to the news coming over the radio. We heard that Jericho was in our hands, and later Hebron and Bethlehem, Ramallah, and all the surrounding towns and villages were again in our hands. We were quite dazed. It seemed so incredible. During the night, we heard the soldiers singing as they sat around their campfires. But intermittent shots from hidden snipers in the old city continued. We were all exhausted, more from emotion than anything else, when we fell asleep in our own beds on Mount Zion. That is the end of part 3 of chapter 7, so please join us again for Thursday, June the 8th, and part 4, the final part of chapter 7, next time. Shalom.